So, what did you miss at Jubilee today? Well, jeepers, you missed the welcoming of 6 new members into the community. The acknowledgement that we are different today than we were yesterday. And everybody who comes and becomes part of the community changes the community, which is a blessing and a challenge, and, well, it's a joy. And that opportunity to experience somebody with a different opinion or a different background or a different understanding, we have the opportunity to see new things, experience new things, and we are challenged to love in new ways. So it's a joy. You also missed a wonderful psalm that sang of the glory of God, but then in the sermon I felt it necessary to read the words of the psalm that were skipped. The words that talk about taking our enemies and holding the sword to their throats. The words that talk of violence and vengeance. The parts we don't usually sing. But in the sermon we reflected on family stories and how we love to tell the happy stories, the great stories, the funny stories, but we rarely tell about the embarrassing stories. We don't tell about those members of the family that are not, that don't present as well. They are the ones that we mention only in hushed tones. We don't like to talk about the ones who have not performed as well, or perhaps have found their way into prison or into the bad books. But they too are part of our stories. And when we look at Scripture, it's the same thing. There are things we love to sing about and stories we love to tell, but we also have to acknowledge that those stories that we don't like as much are also part of who we are. But it's also important to notice that the stories are not finished. It's always about the next part of the story. And today, here and now, each of us is writing a new chapter in the story. So as we embrace the past, we get to decide how we're going to write the future. We get to listen to those stories that we find in Scripture of vengeance and almost seem like bigotry, a small-minded understanding of God. And we're challenged to try and put that into context and perhaps imagine that a people who had been at war a long time and were hurting and were tired, that they could only imagine being loved by some act of revenge. But having emerged from that hurt, emerged from that time of war, perhaps they could imagine a new way of loving and let go of that image. Well, we're invited to look back, engage, and then perhaps let go of that way of loving. And imagine, in fact, that God calls us to something more than vengeance, and that we call on God to love us with something more than beating our enemies, humiliating our opponents. The important thing is that we're invited to keep writing the story. Just because we put it in the Bible and put a back cover on it doesn't mean that the story's over. There's always more to the story, and we're invited to keep writing the story. As we welcome new members to the church today, we agreed that we would keep writing the story. As we gathered around the communion table today and shared in ways that were intimate and vulnerable, in ways that we recognize that we are all together. In fact, to the table today, we invited our beleaguered mayor of Toronto and his detractors. We invited those from the right and those from the left. We invited those from the Senate. We invited those from the House of Parliament. We invited all those people with whom we get along and don't get along. And imagine for that moment that we can all be loving children of God. We're children of God. It's up to us to decide whether we want to be loving, whether we want to keep writing the story. So, if you weren't here today at Jubilee, that's what you missed. But hopefully we will see you soon, and together we'll keep writing the story. Hope to see you soon. God bless.